Alright, so 9.10 trig ratios. Remember, feel free to pause the video at any time to try the problems on your own. I'm just going to fly through it, and you pause it as you need, rewind, whatever you need to do. So we're going to use the calculator to find trig values of angles, and we're going to find missing sides and angles using the trig ratios. If you have a TI-84, make sure that your mode is in degrees. So you're going to hit the mode button right next to that blue second button, and the third one down, it says radian or degree. Make sure degree is highlighted. So we're going to plug these into our calculator. So we're going to hit, for this first one, it says find the sine of 15 degrees to 4 decimal places. We hit sine 15, hit enter, and we get 0.2588. Make sure we're rounding correctly. In this case it was 8.1, so it stays an 8. For our cosine, we plug in cosine of 51. We should get approximately 0.6293. Again, pause the video if you need to at any time. Rewind as well if you need to. So, if we want to find x to the nearest tenth, we can use a little bit of algebra to do so. And I have a picture of your calculators here, so make sure that we know where that sine button is. It's right here. So we're going to find out what the sine of 28 is, and then to get x by itself, we just multiply both sides by 50. So really in your calculator you could plug in 50 times sine of 28, and it will give you your answer. And if you got 23.5 for x, you are in business. Remember, it's set to the nearest tenth. That's one decimal place. Only one. Alright, let's try this next one here. It's a little bit more difficult this time. What I do is I multiply first by x. So I have x times the tangent of 36 degrees equals 3,600. And then I'm going to divide by the tangent of 36 degrees. Now, if you remember the pattern here, meaning you know if you see something like this problem here, you're like, oh, I just need to do 3,600 divided by tangent of 36. That's fine, but be careful not to make any mistakes. So I'm going to have x equals, and in my calculator, I will plug this bad boy in right here. It'll look like this, 3,600 divided by tangent of 36. I know most of us are using the TI-83 or TI-84. So when we plug that in, I got 4,955.0. Keep in mind it's 0.97, so that's 7 rounds to 9 up, which rounds that 4,954 up to 4,955, and you get the 0.0. So that's my final answer right there. Alright, so now we're going to get some diagrams here. We want to find the value of x to the nearest integer. And remember, SOHCAHTOA will be very, very important. So, find the value of x to the nearest integer. Right now, if you're looking at this angle, the x is adjacent and 32 is the hypotenuse. So or cosine is the one that I'm going to be using. So let's set up the ratio. We have cosine of 41 equals adjacent, which is x, over 32. And now we can just multiply by 32, and we get our answer. So let's plug this into our calculator, and I get x is approximately 24, because it says to round to the nearest integer, so that's what we should get. Alright, here it says find the measure of angle A to the nearest degree if tangent of A equals 3.4874. Now, think back to multiplication and division. If you have something like 3x equals 10, I can solve for x by dividing by 3. That's my inverse operation. and I end up with x equals 10 over 3. If I wanted to solve and I have x plus 2 equals 5, I would subtract 2 from both sides because the inverse operation of addition is subtraction. Well, believe it or not, trig has inverse operations as well. If you hit the second button and then you hit tangent, you get that tan negative 1. That's the inverse of tangent. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the tangent inverse of both sides. Because whatever you do to one side, you have to do the other. And what I have is these two cancel, and I'm left with A equals tangent inverse of 3.4874. I plug that into my calculator, and I'll get my answer for A. So it says we want it to the nearest degree, so make sure we round correctly. So for A, I end up getting about 74 degrees. So if you didn't get that, check and see how you plugged it in and see if you can get the right answer. So for sine of A, instead of the tangent inverse, since it's sine, we're going to do sine inverse. So we have A equals sine inverse of 0.5. So I plugged it in my calculator, and I end up with A equals 30 degrees. So if you want the angle, then you use the inverse. All right, that's very important. If we want the angle, we use the inverse. Super, super important. If you're solving for the angle, you use the inverse. If you're solving for a side, you use the regular ones. All right, so I want to find the value of x to the nearest degree. I'm solving for an angle, so I'm using the inverse in this case. So, inverse trig functions. Now, I'm looking at this angle, and across from it, opposite it, is the 23, and adjacent to it is the 11. So the only one with opposite over adjacent would be TOA. But remember, I'm using the inverse, so it's going to be tangent inverse, and it's going to be opposite over adjacent, so 23 over 11. And I can just plug this bad boy into my calculator, and I actually get my degree of about 64 degrees. And there's my answer. All right, a little application here. The slope of a ski ramp is 5 over 12. What is the angle to the nearest degree the ramp makes with the ground? So let's draw a picture. Now we've got this guy here. All right, so we've got angle that it makes with the ground. So this is x. Now, it says the slope is 5 over 12. Well, that's rise over run. So my rise is 5, my run is 12. Well, once again, this looks like a tangent problem because this is my opposite, this is my adjacent side. So, I'm going to be using the tangent inverse of 5 over 12, which is approximately equal to 23 degrees. Make sure you guys are plugging this in your calculator. You're checking to make sure that you're doing it right, because if you're not doing it right and you get to the test, you're going to get a lot of wrong answers and you won't know why, but it's because you didn't practice. So make sure you're practicing plugging these in. Alrighty, so for this we want to find the perimeter of the isosceles trapezoid below to the nearest integer. Now, we're using a little bit of trig here because that's what we're learning, and we're going to figure out some more side lengths. So this isn't like the 30, 60, 90 or Pythagorean triples. We're using trig now. So, what I usually do with these trapezoid problems is I end up drawing in some lines here, so I'm going to do that. Well, if that's true, then this part is 10. And I've got some leftovers. For this one here, we got, well, 10 left over, so 5 and 5, because it's isosceles. So I know that AC and BD are both congruent to each other. Alright, so that means that these two parts are also, we got two congruent right triangles. Let's mark that in there, we got right triangles. So, if this is 5 here, I can use some trig to figure out my missing sides. I really only need this one though because it's asking for the perimeter of the isosceles trapezoid. If it was asking for the height, that would be helpful. But I don't need the height, so I only need to figure out what AC is, not this right here. So let's do that. Well, if this is going to be x, I have 5 here, and here's my angle. Well, 5 is adjacent to the x, and x is the hypotenuse. So we're looking at adjacent and hypotenuse. Well, that's going to be cosine, which is adjacent over hypotenuse. So let's set that up. And I'm looking for my sides, so I'm using the regular one. So I have cosine of 70 degrees equals, well, the adjacent is 5 over x. And we remember from before, we would multiply by x on both sides and then divide by cosine of 70. So x is going to equal 5 divided by cosine of 70. And I'm writing it like that because that's how you'll plug it in your calculator. So when we get x, we end up with about 14.6. So this is 14.6. This is 14.6. And I add all these together, 10 plus 20 plus 14.6 plus 14.6. And I end up with 59 being my nearest integer. All right. And that's that for that problem there. Ticket to leave. So if you're feeling comfortable with this stuff, this is a little bit of review. It's a problem like we had before. Feel free to move on to the homework. If you need a little extra help, let's try this problem right now. Pause it and then play it when you're ready. So, for this one, I'm solving for an angle, so I know I'm using inverses. That's the angle I'm looking for. This is opposite. This is hypotenuse, so I'm using SOHCAHTOA, I'm using the first one. So it's going to be sine inverse of opposite, which is 41, over hypotenuse, which is 122. I plug this into my calculator, and I get x equals 19.6 degrees. And if we want it to the nearest degree, it would be about 20 degrees. But it does not specify, so your choice, whatever you want to round to. But that's what I chose to round to right here. So here's your homework. Don't worry about the date. Sometimes those change, so we'll talk about that in class. But make sure you get your homework done and you are prepared for tomorrow's lesson.